You may know you're listening to this show along the Marketing Podcast Network, but did you know there are other great shows on MPN to help your business? Robbie Samuels hosts the On the Schmooze podcast. Robbie, tell listeners what to expect from the show.
Since 2015, I've interviewed entrepreneurs who overcame challenges to achieve success in their field or industry. Tune in to On the Schmooze to listen as I ask deep questions to elicit untold stories about leadership and networking.
And where can people subscribe?
Find the show at ontheschmooze.com or on marketingpodcast.net, or just search for it wherever you get your podcasts.
You heard them. Go subscribe.
Welcome to That Analytics Podcast, the show where you learn how to measure your marketing so you can make better decisions that save you time and save you money. Who wouldn't want that? I'll be your host, Amanda Webb. Today's episode features my analytics hero. Yes, my Google Analytics hero, which is Dana DiTomaso. Now, she is just amazing, as I will fawn over her in this interview. I did, because she's just so smart. She's one of those like really intelligent people that happens to be doing analytics. And actually, when you hear about where she started out, which was about as far away from analytics and numbers as you could get, that was also really smart. So I know there's lots of insights we can get from her. Now, there is some techie stuff in this, but there is some also quite approachable stuff, thinking about how you can use audiences within your Google Analytics to be a better marketer. And this is really useful. It's something I do all the time, but not to the level, well, not until I did this episode with Dana, not to the level that she does it. I have since signed up for her Google Analytics for Agencies course, and I'm looking forward to delving into that. So I hope you enjoy. Now, before I share this interview with you, I want to ask you a question, because I know this comes up. I wonder, or do you wonder, if you should be spending more time on your analytics? Or do you actually think, what's the point of analytics? Does it really matter if you're not looking at your analytics? Does it really matter if it's not set up properly? Does it just seem like a whole lot of hassle to look at that when you could be happily doing whatever bits of your job you really love doing? Well, if so, I've put together a webinar that will help you get to grips with your Google Analytics so that you actually can see how it's going to save you time and money with your marketing. And it really, really does do that. You're going to find the exact reports and the metrics that you need to measure to see what's working in your marketing. And that means no more avoiding analytics. That means no more staring at that wall of data when you guiltily log in and think, I need to look at this. You're going to understand what's going on. So you can grab your free seat to this webinar now at spiderworking.com/webinar. So that spider, that scary 8-legged creature, working, like doing a job. So a spider doing a job.com/webinar. Now over to the interview with Dana. Welcome to the show, Dana.
Thank you so much for having me.
And I have to say, you have been my analytics hero for a long time. And I'm always I get annoyed because I see something that you say and I go, I wish I was as clever as Dana. So I just want to start there because I think I've got the smartest analytics person I possibly could on the show. So I'm delighted to have you.
Thank you. Thank you.
But I want to know, where did this all start? Where did your journey into marketing, into analytics start?
Yeah, I actually have a good one for this. So I actually have a degree in geography. I went to school in the mid-90s, and so the internet, like the first web browser came out my first year of university. I think that if I had been slightly younger, then I probably would have ended up in the internet from the start. But there was no internet yet, so I was like, I like computers, but I don't know what. And so I ended up going to geography because I also really enjoyed physical geography specifically. And I have a degree in geography, and I focused on what's called fluvial geomorphology, which is the focus of how rivers evolve and change over time. And then I did another year after my degree in ecosystem restoration. So like restoring rivers that have been damaged from human processes back to a natural state. And so that was totally going to be my career, 100%. But when I graduated, a really conservative government had just come to power in Ontario where I was living, and they had cut back all the environment jobs. And so there was really no jobs out there, and I couldn't afford to like do a free job to actually get a paid job. So I interviewed at a software company that made environmental management software for American companies to help them report to the Environmental Protection Agency. Like, okay, it's computers and environment. This will be a good match. Did that job for a while, ended up working at a CRM company for a couple of years after that, and then I got laid off and I had 6 months worth of severance. And in the meantime, I'd been sort of fiddling around with making websites on the side, like just for fun. And then when I got laid off and I had the 6 months of severance, I thought, well, now I can, do my own thing and try to make a go of it working for myself because I'm not a great employee. Um, I'm a much better business owner than I am an employee.
Same.
Yeah, yeah. So I ended up doing that and took that 6 months to like learn how to do things properly, get my first client. This was in 2000. And my very first client, I think I launched her website and maybe like a couple months later, she messaged me and said, how do I get higher on Google? And I said, I have no idea. I will get back to you. And so I did some Googling because Google was still like relatively new at that point and found Rand Fishkin's blog, which was not called Moz yet. It was like pre-Moz, and ended up meeting him at 2004 at a conference, just followed the Moz stuff. And it turns out I was way better at SEO than I was making websites. So I focused entirely on SEO until about 2016, 2017, when we started getting more questions. Google Tag Manager was recently out and started getting lots of questions about like, how do I track this? How do I track that? I'm like, okay, I think it's time to learn this stuff. And it turns out I'm way better. Well, not necessarily better. I think I was getting bored of SEO is I think what it was. It wasn't necessarily capturing my attention the way it used to. And analytics has been so interesting. And so really it's my full-time thing now. Like I still keep up on SEO. I still do technical audits. I have a course in technical SEO and LinkedIn Learning. But I would say like my day-to-day work is in analytics with a little bit of technical SEO just because I find that part of it fun. So that's where I ended up. And then it was, pretty calm until GA4 came out. And then GA4 just took over my life. And I can't imagine. I feel bad for people where it's like, analytics is something they do off the side of their desk because there's no way you could keep up with everything that happens in GA4 and Tag Manager and Looker Studio. Like there's too much and there's too many changes. And there's changes that Google doesn't publish. You just find out about them when you log back in. Like I went on vacation for 2 weeks and I came back and like, there's all this new stuff. The UI looks totally different, right? And it's so frustrating. And as someone who keeps up on GA4, like my job is to do this. I find it frustrating. I can only imagine what, normal human beings whose job it is not to be in analytics all day, right? How frustrating they must find it. And so I would say a lot of my time is spent like explaining decisions Google's made and like how analytics works and the intricacies of measurement. So that's where I am now.
Definitely, yeah. I think when I left the world of social media, which is where I started my whole journey, yep. I was going, oh, thankfully I'm now doing analytics. Well, this was many years later, but I'm kind of like, now I'm doing analytics, there's going to be less change. Yeah, right. No. I would say like, I think probably the field that keeps up with analytics in terms of changes is I find PPC. Our ads team at Kickpoint is always like, oh, they changed the interface again, or there's this new change or that new change. So I think like that's a field that also changes quite a bit, although SEO is going through a bit of a moment too. But I would say that for sure the pace of change in some fields is faster than others. Yeah. But that's part of the fun for me. I know it's a pain for other people, but it's what keeps me interested. Yep. Like you said, you kind of slightly moved away from SEO, and I was the same with, a lot of that. Like I've done a lot of marketing things and finally landed on this because this is the one that keeps me interested. But enough about me. That's not what we're here for. Let's talk about, I think we're going to talk about audiences. And really because I've been watching a lot of your stuff about audiences recently, and I also think they're so underused and misunderstood by people. So I think this would be a really good opportunity to talk about why we would create audiences in GA4, the sort of audiences we create, and how there are a few little hacks that can help us get around using things like Tag Manager. So let's start with what are audiences? Why should we use them?
Yes. Yeah, audiences are groupings of users, sessions, etc., based on characteristics that you set. So, for example, an audience could be everyone who views this page or everyone who did not view this page, for example. So a common audience I'll often set up will be people who viewed the careers page or people who never viewed the careers page, because people who are looking for a job at your company probably aren't going to convert and become your customer. They just want to work there. So excluding them, especially if you have like a lot of people visiting that page, is probably a good idea. My classic example of audiences really thinks about one of our clients who's a convention center, and they have two different properties. So we're managing both their websites, but they have the same basic idea where they have people who book events and then they have people who go to events. And the people who go to events are a very different audience, usually, than the people who book events. So when we're thinking about things like their conversion rate, or I guess their key event rate, we're really thinking about, who are the people who would realistically convert? Because if we look at the website as a whole, 60% of the people who come to the website are people who just want to know what time is the show going to start, how much is parking, what's the transit to get there, right? They're not thinking about booking their wedding. And so what I would rather do in their analytics is segment out all these people who only care about the shows and instead have a segment of people who just are looking at those booking pages and then segment it further by people booking conferences and weddings and whatnot. And then when we're looking at things like key event rates, especially from paid, we're only considering the people who could realistically be in that audience. So it can take a conversion rate from something like 1% that looks really bad to something like, 10 or 12%. And that can really make a difference when you're evaluating campaigns, because if you end up with so much noise, it means that those little changes that you make in the campaign, there's too much other data and you can't tell if a campaign change is actually being effective or not. But if you segment it down to just the people who could realistically be interested in the service, then you can see, are we making changes? Is this more effective in terms of driving customers? If we make changes to the website, is this helping drive up conversion rates? And so that's been really good for them to just be like, here's the audience of people going to shows, and they look at them too, but for different reasons. And then here's the audience of people who could reasonably book events. And so I think that that's, yeah, of course we use that for remarketing in some cases, but a lot of it is just, let's just look at the data that's relevant for the question we have at hand, which is not usually how does every single person in the world use our website? And I think that that's where people can really make a mistake in terms of looking at their traffic as a whole, as opposed to just the parts that really, really matter.
Okay, that makes total sense. And as so many businesses would have more than one target market or more than one product that would appeal to different groups of people. So that makes sense. That makes total sense. Are there kind of like any audiences that we should all create? Like you should definitely have an audience for this.
I have a standard set of events. So in my course, Analytics for Agencies, I have I give out like this is the plan that we use for our own analytics. So I'm setting up analytics for people, and I'm always adding audiences to it. I actually just had a great conversation with Brittany, who's our PPC lead on our team, about the kinds of audiences that she always wants for paid. So that goes in there too. And so whenever we're setting up a new GA4 property or working with a new one, we have this standard set of audiences. So one of them is anyone who's converted in any way. So just grouping all the conversions together into an audience, and then people who have never converted. So I really like creating positive and negative audiences, is what I call them. And in GA4, to create those, in case you've never created a negative audience, when you're going and create a new audience, just remove the positive part where it says include people where, just hit the trash can next to that and then click the exclude and just say people who have never, or people who have done this, exclude those people. And then it's everybody except for those people. And I find that that's also really effective. So converters, not converters, careers pages, not careers pages. And then people who have visited your site multiple times in a set time period, especially for people who have visited your site multiple times, say from paid or from organic search or from social media, either paid or not paid. Because I find as well that people who visit your site a lot from organic social media are probably already fans. They might already be customers. And so you wouldn't expect them to necessarily purchase. You might want to exclude those from any sort of conversion analysis you're doing. Key event analysis. I'm never going to change that word. It's just going to be conversions forever, right?
I can never remember that. Never.
Another mistake I see companies making a lot is like if you have a login on your website, if people visit the login page or they actually log in, exclude them from the audience that you evaluate when you're thinking about conversion rate, right? You already sold to them, unless you do repeat purchases, right? For e-commerce, maybe it's a repeat purchase thing, great. But if you're in a SaaS business, they bought. They're probably not going to buy again. So why are you using them when you evaluate your overall site conversion rate, right? Like those people are going to skew your data. So you could exclude them entirely from, to have an exclusion audience of people already logged in, and please use that exclusion audience in paid. Like it's not perfect, but like don't advertise to people who already bought the stuff. It's annoying. So people visit a lot from different places, people who've logged in, a way to exclude people. So for example, we have an audience of people who have accessed courses, like the logged in parts of the courses, and then we don't include them when we're thinking about people who've bought, because we want to make sure that we're not, they already bought. If they buy another course, great, but like that's not the primary purpose of, we want to evaluate their engagement instead. So I would say those are like some standard audiences to set up. And then the other thing too is that create your audiences as early as possible. Audiences don't backfill. They only fill from the moment you create them going forwards. And the other thing to check too is after you create an audience, give it a couple days, go back in, look at the audiences list. If it says less than 10, that means that either the thing that you've set it for has not happened, or you've set up the audience wrong. So definitely go back and check a couple days. Don't wait like a month and be like, oh, that audience didn't work. But if you're having trouble figuring out what audiences are, this is where explorations, which I talked about actually at your event. So if people haven't watched that video, you should. But setting up explorations is great because you can do a segment and exploration, which is a great way to test out an audience before you go ahead and create an audience, because segments are backward-looking audiences essentially. And you can create audience based on segments once you have something that you've put together that you're really happy with. So just experiment with audiences. It doesn't hurt to try audiences. They don't negatively impact your data. Just create stuff and see if you're getting the kinds of people in that audience that you would expect to.
One of the things I used to love about audiences, or one of the things I used to do most with it, was I used to use them in comparisons. And then, of course, like not long ago, Google rolled out comparisons, which I'm freaking delighted about, instead of having like this bookmarks bar full of things so that I can reactivate comparisons. They're there. But I think people get confused now because you can create a comparison, you can create an audience. So when should you create a comparison, like one that sticks? So you can just, for anyone that hasn't tried them, you can just create one that's just there for now, but you can have them.
I do want to say that if you want to create a comparison that sticks, this is where I don't like the UI, because if you're on a report and you create a comparison from there, it doesn't save. But if you go into the admin and click on comparisons and then save it there, then it does save. So keep that in mind. I feel like that's a UI fail. Yeah. Lots of people made that mistake. Yeah. Anyway, so it's I do like the new comparisons for sure. I do wish you could save them with reports though. I feel like that's a feature that needs to happen. Like you can save a filter with a customized report. You can't save a comparison. My rule of thumb with comparisons versus audiences is like, is there more than one action that a person could take? Because comparisons are really just like one dimension. This is the thing. And also you have to create an audience if you want to look at any metrics at all, because comparisons and filters are just for dimensions. And so if people are like, what's a dimension? What's a metric? Dimension is a grouping of data, like pages viewed, and a metric is how many times people viewed the pages. So if you want to say, I want to look at people who've viewed more than 5 videos, or people who've looked at least 10 pages, you can't do that in a comparison. You'd have to create an audience. So that's something to keep in mind as well, is just the type of evaluation you're doing will determine if you're doing a comparison or audience. But I mean, honestly, I just like creating audiences just because it's handy to have. And then you can get them out into Looker Studio too, which you can't do with segments and you can't do with comparisons. So creating an audience is always good there.
And of course, you can make a comparison. No, you can make an audience a comparison, because I went obviously into comparisons.
Then it's a dimension.
Yes. Yep. So, yes, that works really well. So it does save all that time that I used to have of trying to create these complex reports. Okay, so I know there's some magic we can do with audiences that I totally don't do. And that's what I'm talking about when I watch your stuff and I get annoyed that I hadn't thought of that myself. So the first one was I watched a video you had, or it was a post, I can't remember, but it was about how you could use audiences to do things that you would normally need to use Tag Manager for.
Yes. Yeah, that was so that was actually a lesson that we released from my Practical GA4 course, because a lot of people who take my Practical GA4 course have been handed GA4 and they're told, I don't know, you figure it out. And they don't have Tag Manager, or like Tag Manager is like, this is a step too far, which is totally fine. Not everyone has to be a Tag Manager expert. And I appreciate why Google really is pushing Tag Manager hard when they pushed out GA4. But like, again, if analytics is off the side of your desk, you learn GA4. Good job. You don't have to learn Tag Manager as well. And there is a lot you can do within GA4 that doesn't require Tag Manager. So one of the examples that I showed in that video, there's a few different things, but that video specifically is talking about how can you record clicks on different items without using Tag Manager. Because typically if someone says, well, I want to record a button click, and this button specifically, you'd have to use Tag Manager. But what if you can't or won't? So one of the things I recommend in the video is adding a parameter to your URL. So let's say your website is my website, kpplaybook.com, and you want to record people clicking on the sign up button, for example, for newsletters, and the one specifically that maybe is in the header. So in that case, you could add a parameter that would be question mark page underscore location equals top nav, for example. Make sure that URL will actually work. But then what happens is when you click a URL on your site, it does record in the full page URL. So this isn't the page path dimension. This is the page URL dimension. It will record the entire URL, including that parameter that you added. And then you can make an audience of people who've clicked on that URL specifically, or like viewed that URL that includes that parameter. But then the magic part is, what if you want an event that's recorded every time someone does that? Then that's where you would use the audience, the event trigger in audiences. And you can trigger an event every time someone enters an audience. So if you make an audience that the duration of it is 1 day, that's the shortest you can make an audience, then you create a trigger and say, every time someone enters this audience, record this event. Typically, I prepend audience created events with AUD underscore so that I know where they came from. Otherwise, you're digging around going, where is this event coming from? What is that? That's my way of naming it. Come up with your own, but definitely have a way to delineate like this is an audience created event so you're not wondering later where it is, or document it really well. And then what you do is you also check the checkbox to readmit people to the audience when they re-enter the audience. So like if I click the button today and then I click it again 3 days from now, you'll want to record that event twice. So make sure the duration is 1 day. And that means, if I click it 3 times in 1 day, it'll only record one event. Oh, well, like there's the limitation of it. But the reality is, most people probably will only click it once. And then every time they click it, even if they come back and click the same button again 7 days later, they will still record a second event. So the trick is to fire an event when they enter the audience, make the audience duration 1 day, and then make sure that you fire another event. I think the checkbox is called fire an additional event when the audience membership refreshes, is what it's called. And that's when you create the event. And that's how you can record multiple times. Yeah, and that post is on my website at kpblaylock.com/resources. I'm going to look up exactly what it's named. Sure there's
a link in
it's called,
the show notes.
Are people engaging with X? Are people clicking X? And that's a free lesson for my Practical GA4 course. And I just really like creating that kind of thing based on weird questions people ask me. So like, how can I do this? And I can't do this. And I really love making analytic solutions for those kinds of like really limited cases. And sometimes the answer is like, you can't, sorry. But I'm stubborn and I always try to find a way to make it happen.
Yeah, I love that kind of digging around that you get to do in analytics. But yeah, I haven't made any genius moments like that yet. One day I'll get there, right?
Well, I'll say the other thing too that I use audiences for quite a bit is the funnel exploration is one of my favorite explorations in GA4. And the easiest way really to make steps in a funnel is if you have events for it. So for example, it can be an audience based on just viewing a specific page or viewing a specific page and taking an action. And then if you have an event that fires when someone becomes a member of that audience, you can then use that event as a step in your funnel. You can even use those audience triggered events as key events / conversions. So for example, if you're ads team, if you're saying, well, we only want to, have someone convert when they, for example, for one of our clients who has Google Ads grants, one of their major goals is people really engaging with their content. So instead of a purchase or a donation, we have another key event that's actually people consuming their content, which is a tag manager recipe we have available on our website, which means that they spent long enough on the page to read the page and they got all the way to the bottom of the content. And so by recording that, we can then send that off to Google Ads, for example, and then say, have an audience of people who've consumed at least 3 pieces of content, fire an event, make that a key event. Those are people who are extra engaged, for example. So that's really where kind of thinking, I always tell clients, like, approach this like you're not thinking about the limitations of the product. Tell me in an ideal world what you want. And then my job is to figure out whether or not that's possible. And that's really the best way to approach analytics. Don't approach it from like what you think or what your limitations are in terms of like, I don't know if we can do this. I don't know if we can do that. To say in a perfect world, this is what I want, and then see if there's a way to make that happen.
So getting the right questions is it asking the right questions? Is it really, I want to know this? And as long as you've got a good reason to, because I would quite happily jump down a rabbit hole to find anything, but really to use my time wisely, you've got to have a good reason for me to find out something.
Oh, yeah. And I find too with clients, like, don't say to me, well, how many sessions have we had per channel? Like, tell me what your question is, which is, what is our most popular source of traffic, for example, right? Like, phrase it like Jeopardy. It's like the answer is in the form of a question. And I find that this is where this is really helpful for them to kind of take a step back from the dimensions of the metrics and just think about what is the question you're asking of the data. Because really, especially when you're putting together reports are a story that answers these questions. And so usually when I'm making a report, everything is a question. How often does this happen? Do people who come to the site via different devices actually, convert at the same proportion that they come to the website? Like those are the kinds of things we want to know. Is this audience engaging with our content? How many people bought this thing, right? Those are all questions. It's not, purchase conversions or anything like that. Like I think we need more plain language in analytics reporting.
In Google in general, I have this phrase that I use when I'm teaching, googly-gook, because they never phrase anything in the most simple way that you can. And it's like, it's really busting through that and getting into like the plain English. Absolutely. Kind of going into a different topic, because we were talking about this before we started recording, and I think it is important, which is how accurate is our Google Analytics data? And I'm laughing as I say that.
Yeah. It's not accurate at all. I mean, how accurate it is kind of depends on your own limitations. So, for example, you're in Ireland. There's this little thing called GDPR, which some people in North America are vaguely aware of, and some people think it doesn't apply to them. It does. And if you're in Europe and you have consent management on your website, and most of your audience is coming from Europe or the European Economic Area, technically, that means that you probably don't have a lot of people saying yes to being tracked, right? A lot of people love clicking that deny button. And if they say deny, you can't track them. And there's this cookieless tracking in GA4 where you're sending still data to GA4. It's just not personally identifiable. Is that GDPR compliant? I think the jury is still out on that one. We'll see. But even tools like Matomo, for example, which they say is GDPR compliant, they also have cookieless tracking. So that is like a technique that these tools use. But the problem is that, again, even if you track them cookieless, you're still not getting the same kind of data you would if everyone said yes to being tracked. And sometimes that data is kind of crap. And I don't necessarily want to include it in my reports because it's Google kind of making it up as it goes, this Google model data. I'm not a big fan of it. So in that case, you only have half of your traffic, maybe even less. I've seen some cases where only 20% of users to a site said yes to being tracked. And so a lot of consent management tools, my personal favorite is CookieBot, which is just, I think, rebranded user-centrics, but CookieBot is my favorite. And they have a chart showing you percentage of people who said yes to different kinds of tracking. And then you can see, only half of our users have said yes. So if I'm looking at my analytics and I see these numbers, that's only half of the overall users. And even, on top of that, there's people who use ad blockers, which I know that there's this new version of Chrome coming out, which is going to make it less easy to block things. But you know what? People are going to find a way to not be tracked. And you kind of have to respect that if people say no. So it's where, even for example, my own website, the KP Playbook website where we sell courses, marketers love ad blockers. We can only track half of our sales. And of the half we can track, half of those show up as direct because also people remove my UTMs that I put on absolutely everything. Like I am dedicated to UTM tracking my URLs, but people remove them all the time and then they just show up as direct. I'm like, that's great. Thanks so much. I have no idea what's working half the time. And so, that's kind of the reality of it. So if I looked at this data and I said, oh, well, this is 100% of my tracking, it's not. I can see in our actual, you can't hide that you bought something. So we can see the number of courses that people have bought and the amount that they've spent, but a lot of it just drops into a black hole of we have no idea where these people came from. And so people will look at that and say, well, your tracking must be broken. This is inherently how the internet works these days. You can say no to being tracked. You can hide your steps. And sometimes too, systems don't talk to each other. For example, if I'm on your website on my laptop and on my phone, and you don't have a login in any way, so I'm not logging into the site, I'm going to show up as two users. There used to be Google Signals in GA4 that would tie that together, but that's not showing in GA4 anymore, so I show up as two individual users, even though I am the same person. It doesn't matter. It's like if you think about, say, a user is your driver's license, and then you think of your devices as individual cars. The government knows you're you. You have these two cars, but all I see are the two separate license plates in GA4. So I think that's something really to keep in mind is how people engage with you really makes a difference in terms of, the relative accuracy of your data. And so what I've been advocating for a lot, and there's a post that I've sent you that will also be in the show notes called Marketing Analytics Data is Wrong. Can it be fixed? Spoiler alert, no. There's a lot of stuff that you can do in terms of how you report that focuses more on what I call directional reporting. Are things moving in the correct direction? Proportionally, are we converting? So, I can only track this 50% of people. What I want to know, if this 50%, are they doing the things I want them to do proportionally? And then can I extrapolate that out to the whole? So those are the kinds of things you can do. Just like you can't track everything. So grab what you can, but really evaluate as much as possible the data that you can grab, and then just let go of the stuff that you can't. Because the amount of effort it would take with, say, server-side tracking, which gets around ad blockers, but isn't necessarily accessible for a lot of smaller businesses, or, you just say, screw you, GDPR, I'm going to track what I want and then risk a fine. Good luck. Is it really worth it for that extra percentage of people you might capture? Probably not. Like, just work with what you have and spend your time pulling insights from the data you can capture.
I think that's such smart advice, because we can get obsessed by that. And I know, every time I start working with a client and I'll go, your cookie consent isn't working properly, like that needs to be fixed. And it's just like, people don't want to know. And I'm based in the EU, I'm based in a place where it really matters. So
those fines for GDPR are not kidding around amounts of money. It's based on gross revenue. Like, don't mess around. You're going to spend a lot of money. And have you ever, so here's my question, have you ever worked with a client who had their consent management set up properly before you started working with them? Because I never have.
I'm kind of thinking, there's one I just did some work for, and they had a pretty hot marketing agency. So it was the best analytics setup I'd seen. Usually I go in and there's 10 different properties, and, 3 different tag managers all sending different things. I think that was the only one though. So actually they did most of the work rather than me. So yeah, absolutely. I would even, I managed to break my own analytics testing out my cookie consent. So, it's
totally.
not easy.
I break my own stuff all the time for sure. That's how you learn too, right? So another thing
break your own stuff.
Break your own stuff. I have 3 GA4s running on my website. One is just like a test property that I try weird stuff out in. Another one's a backup of another experiment I'm doing. And the other one is production data, where I do not putz around with that. So have a second GA4 running on your website that can push off to and do your weird experiments there, so you're not playing around with production data. There's no real appreciable hit in terms of speed. It's very quick. So I would say set up a few GA4s, experiment. Just don't touch your production data unless you're sure that the thing you want to do is working properly.
Yeah, that's really good advice. I probably should have done that, of course, instead of now looking at my analytics and going, you know what, I should just install it again, start back from scratch my consent. I did totally kill 90% of my traffic and all my key events when I messed around with it for a little while. So now I look at my key events and go, there was that. So yes, I should have a second property. I'm going to do that. That's the first thing I'm going to do when we finish talking. I'm going to put a second GA4 account on there, so I can't break it.
Yes.
Okay, great advice. So it's not accurate, but we can still use it to see trends, for example, to see, are we doing better this month than we did last month, better this year than we did last year? Okay, great advice. And
and I would say in that post as well, something else that I talk about is one of my favorite charts. I know people make fun of pie charts as being bad data design, but I really like doing 2 pie charts. I have a pie inside a donut. It's like a turducken, but the donut is a percentage of traffic by channel, for example. And then the inner pie is the percentage of key events by channel. And then you look and see, do the slices match up? And if there's a weird, out of whack, you have way more organic traffic than you have organic traffic converting, then that says, these people are coming to the site, but they're not converting. Where are they going? Why aren't we converting them at the same rate whether we're converting visitors from, say, paid or other channels? And that is really, there's no numbers on that chart. I don't show percentages. I'm just looking at the size of the slices. And that's the kind of chart that anyone can look at and immediately see if there's issues. There's no numbers involved. So you're not getting hung up on well, this says 19 form fills, but I have 22 form fills in my CRM. Your analytics is wrong. Those 3 people had ad blockers, or consent management or whatever it might be. So it's, I really like those kinds of charts because it takes away the focus from the numbers and really thinks about the proportions of the data and if they match up.
Not all pie charts are bad. I just thought I'd throw that out.
No, and that's funny because I was just looking at Measure Camp from, Measure Camp just happened in Chicago, and there was a whole session of people making fun of pie charts. I'm like, no, sometimes pie charts are good. If I had been there, I would have defended them.
I think it's just a case of, and I know I used to do this as well. They look pretty, right? Because they're nice colors, like on the screen. So, like before I really got into understanding data visualization, I was the person that was doing them all wrong. So, but yeah, a pie chart can actually be effective if it's used well. And that one sounds cool. I'm going to check that out.
Yep, there's an image of that in the post as well about
Great.
Yeah.
So for an example of a great pie chart, everyone have a look at that. I'm going to move on to the quick fire questions unless there's anything you wanted to add in there. Okay.
All right, hit me.
So data, or data?
Oh, data.
Data. Yeah, well, that's what I'd expect. I'm data. I'm data too. Is that a Canadian thing? Is because obviously you're in the US.
Canadian. So the Canadian accent is like this weird mix of the UK and America. And it does vary based on where you are in the country. Like I'm from Ontario originally. Definitely there's different ways we pronounce stuff in Ontario than like where I live now, which is British Columbia out in the far west coast. So it does depend on where you grow up. People know I'm from Ontario sometimes when I speak because of how I say things like farm or car apparently sounds very more east coast than west coast. So yeah, it's I don't know how they say it in the States. I'm sure that's maybe data. That sounds very British though to say data.
They say a data a lot. And data is the guy who has the Loves Data YouTube channel. I don't know if you've ever seen him.
Oh,
I didn't realize there was another way of saying it until I watched his channel. And then I was like, okay, good. Yep. Right. The second one, I almost bounced in earlier when we were talking about this. And then I thought, no, I'll leave it to the end. It's a quick fire question. So cookies, do you dunk them or do you delete them? So as in a cookie banner, is it a yes or a no?
Most of the time I just say yes to get it out of the way, but I have an ad blocker, so I know it's not doing anything. So I am the problem. I understand that.
Marketers are
but if
the
it's
problem.
a company I really like, I do say yes to cookies. And sometimes if I'm going to like buy something from an ad, I also say yes to cookies. I'm like, that ad company should get credit for this ad because it was a good ad. So I really do think about it.
Yeah, I think we are the worst. We are totally the worst for this. I actually do accept cookies most of the time. It surprised me. People who listen to this podcast are sick of me saying this because I always say, surprised me that so many people don't. Like people who aren't marketers don't either. When I started seeing my stats coming up in my cookie banner, whatever you want to call it. Okay, third one. I'm just looking at how it's auto-corrected that for me. AI, yay or nay?
Yay, absolutely. I would say AI has been, I mean, up to a point. So for example, I teach a course at the University of Alberta. At the beginning of the year, I submit my questions for assignments into ChatGPT just to see what it gives me. And that's my banner to be like, okay, is a student just like ChatGPT'd it? I don't care if someone uses ChatGPT to help them write their stuff, for sure. And I think it can be valuable, especially, you know, if you have English as an additional language, that it can really help like tidy up your grammar and stuff if you're really struggling with that. But don't have the ideas come from ChatGPT. It's either to help you build an outline or to help tidy things up at the end. It's not where the ideas come from. And what I want to see from people is like, what are your ideas? And then use ChatGPT to clean it up. Because I think of it like a calculator. You know, in math, we're allowed to use calculators now. And the same thing for grammar, right? There's no reason that we can't use something like ChatGPT to help tidy up grammar if that isn't your strong suit. You know, like doing math. No, I'm not going to figure out like 24 times 56. I'm going to use a calculator. The same thing for like, what's the correct way to write it's? Use ChatGPT for that sort of thing, you know?
Yeah, actually, that's really good. I hadn't thought of the calculator analogy, but yeah, who wants to be there kind of working out like complicated math problems when we can just do it?
I gave a talk to a teachers association. They were very stressed about ChatGPT when it first came out. I'm like, look, eventually it is going to be like the calculator. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. Like you still need to teach people the basic rules of grammar and structure and everything else. But at some point, it's like when you learn long division in school, if they still teach that. I don't know if they do. But when you learn long division in school, you know, that was, okay, now you know how to do it. And now we're going to use calculators forever. The end. You know, just learn the structure, but then there's a faster way.
So true. Okay. So that's my 3 questions, but I do have an additional one, which is what one thing, and you've probably got a massive list, would you change about analytics if you could? What, maybe Google Analytics, like what one thing would you like that it shows you, or one thing that it doesn't do that you would love it to do?
Annotations. Honestly, if I had to pick one thing, it would be annotations. And I was talking to Krista Seiden, who people might know used to work at Google on the analytics team. And I said to her, like, what are annotations coming. She knows a little bit of like behind the scenes at Google, and she's like, nobody used them. Like, that's a lie. Everybody used them. Everybody I know used them and misses them so much. And yeah, there's tools you can use that will overlay it. Like, one thing we do is we have a Google sheet that overlays annotations on top of charts in Looker Studio, but like annotations in GA4 should have been there. And I miss them. And sometimes it's easier just to put it in one single place instead of remembering to open the sheet. People forget about it. If they're in analytics already, looking at the impact of something, it's so much easier to add annotations there. So hopefully they're coming. I mean, like, I heard a little rumor that maybe, but yeah, I would love to see annotations. There's so many other things I would change, but I feel like for a quality of life update, annotations feels important.
I kind of think they're bringing the features back a little bit at a time, because we got the anomaly detecting circle, which is like very exciting.
Which is so funny because but we had that in explorations. I don't think I want it outside of explorations, only because it adds a lot of visual clutter. And what I worry about with the GA4 interface is I feel like they're adding like this plot row stuff and everything else. That's helpful, but it also adds a lot of visual clutter. And I'm always an advocate for like, make your stuff as tidy as possible, only show what's important. And I worry that with the new stuff that they're adding in, it's just going to make it like more and more cluttered and make it harder for people to parse what's going on. So, don't go too crazy, Google, but please, annotations. Thank you.
And in fairness, that was one of the problems with Universal Analytics, because they kept bolting on new stuff. It just became this like intense menu filled interface. So,
I can only imagine the volume of technical debt they must have had in Universal Analytics. Like, it was based on a code base that came out in 2003. It was creaky.
Great. I have a long list of analytics things, but we could be here all day talking about that. So I am going to say thanks a million for giving us your time today. Where should people go? I know you have a few courses, so tell us about those, who they're for, and then where they should connect with you.
Yeah, definitely. So my website is kpplaybook.com. I'm mostly on LinkedIn. There's only 2 Dana DiTomasos in the world, and the other one got married and hyphenated her last name, so now I'm it. So it's not hard to find me if you can spell my name right. And the 2 courses that I have on KP Playbook are Practical GA4, which is just GA4 in depth, start to finish. I assume that people know nothing, and I walk them all the way through from how does analytics work anyway, generally, all the way to advanced exploration work. And so there's about 6.5 hours of courses in there, so you could do it in a single day if you just sit down and watch videos. And then the other course I have is Analytics for Agencies. This one talks about Tag Manager and GA4 and Looker Studio, and has all of our templates and tools that we use at my agency Kickpoint when we're delivering analytics solutions to our clients. And when I make updates, I update what's there because I use those tools in the course when I'm doing analytics updates for my clients. So that's, and it includes an office hours, and both courses include access to a community where you can ask me literally anything. So it is like having a personal analytics helper when you're stuck with different questions. I would say that that's definitely the place to go. And then the other thing too is I do have 4 courses on LinkedIn Learning, one of which just came out in August, the new improved advanced GA4. So if you're just getting started in GA4, you've watched the basic GA4 stuff, check out my advanced GA4 course in LinkedIn Learning. And if you don't have LinkedIn Learning Premium, if you have a library card, a lot of libraries have free access to the LinkedIn Learning courses. So check through your local public library if you don't have LinkedIn Premium. Or message me and then I can just share it for free for 24 hours. There's that too.
That's, I didn't know. I kind of feel like I did know about that. And I think Irish libraries do have it, but it comes back to the back of my head. So that's definitely something I should check out too. Yeah.
And like if there's students listening too, check your university library as well. Most of them also have access to LinkedIn Learning courses.
Great. So thanks a million for being on the show, and do check out your courses. It is on my wish list for me to do your agency's course. So hopefully by the end of the year, I will have done it or started at least.
I was going to say the other thing I did for Analytics for Agencies is so right after we're finished recording this, I actually have study time because I always buy courses and I never actually take them. So I do an hour Friday mornings where we can just hang out on Zoom and people watch the courses. And I'm here if they have questions. It's not like a dedicated office hours, but that way people actually take the course because I really want people to finish the course, not just pay for it.
You know what? That's weird. I do exactly the same with my Analytics ACE course. We have like co-working Q&A. So it's 2 hours where everyone can just sit together and work. And actually hardly ever any questions come up. It's just that space where people dedicate to doing it. So that's a fabulous idea.
Yeah, I love it. And actually, last week I had someone from Switzerland who it's the end of her day. It's the beginning of my day for me. And she just pops some popcorn and watches analytics videos for an hour like it's a movie, which is so hilarious and cute. And I love that. So, yeah.
Fabulous. Great.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, like I say, that's on my wish list to do. So hopefully before the end of the year, I'll be in there taking that course.
Awesome.
And I'll see some of our listeners in there too. Thanks so much.
Thank you for having
I was not wrong, was I? Dana is amazing. If you want to find any of the links or any of the resources that Dana talked about in this episode, you can head over to spiderworking.com/tap. That's TAP4. Tap4. Spiderworking.com/tap4. In next week's episode, you're going to meet Fred Pike. Now, what I love about Fred is he's as enthusiastic and as excited about analytics as I am, and he's been doing it a long time. So we have a really great chat about, why your e-commerce might not be sending the right stuff to Google Analytics, why it's a bit messy in your Google Analytics. And he also shares an amazing tip that he got from an analytics course that he recently took. So I definitely think it's worth tuning in to.
You may know you're listening to this show along the Marketing Podcast Network, but did you know there are other great shows on MPN to help your business? Hennika Watkins-Porter hosts The Entrepreneurial You, empowering entrepreneurs with insights on leadership, business, and success. Hennika, tell listeners what to expect from your show.
So we provide innovative business strategies and practical solutions to common entrepreneurial challenges.
And where can people subscribe?
Find us at hennikawatkinsporter.com, as well as the Marketing Podcast Network at marketingpodcast.net, or search for it wherever you get your podcasts.
You heard her. Go subscribe. This podcast is heard along the Marketing Podcast Network. For more great marketing podcasts, visit marketingpodcasts.net.